Welcome back, folks. Great job working through the first five components of effective coaching. And now we are getting ready to do the sixth component, and it's arguably the most complicated and the most difficult, and that is of communication. So really for this next hour or so, we're going to dig deep into how best to communicate and why communication is so important to becoming an effective coach. So I'm going to share my screen here and we're going to get right into the presentation. Okay, here we are. Again, we're going to earn our whistle just like we've been doing this all week, working hard, paying attention, trying to become the best coach we can possibly be. So why do we even communicate? Or let's take a step back. What is communication? So communication is simply a series of inputs and outputs. So we're either receiving information or giving it. We're going to start off with inputs. Inputs are about listening, how information comes into our ears, how information comes in through our eyes, and we observe what is happening. And ultimately, we are trying to feel the intent of the communication that's being conveyed to us. What is really happening? Ever ask yourself, the heck is going on right now? It's complicated. And there's a lot of data that's hitting our brains through all of our senses that we have to make sense of, right? So that's the inputs. And then the outputs is us speaking. That's probably the way that we communicate the most. Our actions, like our behaviors, but also like our actions, like how we move our hands, how we stand, am I leaning in? Am I leaning back? That's all action. And when we output communication, we are trying to project intent. So inputs are feeling intent and our outputs are projecting intent. Making sense of all this is the most difficult, and that is why we're going to start with inputs. So when we think about inputs, let's think about listening. Do you think you're a good listener? Still, to this day, many of you have taken this course already before, and we've dug deep into listening. Still, do you think you're a great listener? It's really difficult. I can confess I am not, and this is something that I work on all of the time. And what happens, and it's just natural, sometimes we don't listen fully to the people communicating information to us because we are putting up these blocks that prevent us from doing so. So many times we can hear noise, like you hear sound, you recognize the words, but we're not fully present and engaging and interpreting exactly what is happening in this moment. And that's what these listening blocks are. So pseudo listening is hearing, but not actually listening. And look at all these blocks here. We have comparing, right? Think of an example of what comparing would be, right? Someone's speaking and you find yourself in your own inner monologue being like, I'm either better or not as good as what the communicator's telling me right now. And there's mind reading. So mind reading is like when a couple says, it's, oh my God, it's so cool. Like we finish each other's sentences all the time. Like I'll say this, and then they just say what I'm about to say. And it's always cute, like when you're like dating in the beginning, but it gets really annoying when someone's trying to mind read, finish your sentences, and you're thinking to yourself, no, that's not at all what I was going to say. Right. So mind reading, we want to make sure that we're not trying to finish people's sentences in our own heads. Let them finish and listen openly to hear exactly what they're saying. Rehearsing. Think about rehearsing. That's when you can't hear what somebody else is saying because you're just working out in your own brain when you get to speak what you're going to say. So think about when we do that the most. Usually it's when we're being introduced to somebody for the first time, right? Ever get introduced to someone and forget their name instantaneously? Like, what'd they say? And usually it's because you're working through this way of introducing yourself. I'm going to I'm going to stand firm and I'm going to look them straight in the eye. I'm going to give a great handshake. And then I'm going to say, hi, I'm Harrison Bernstein, or whatever your name is. And then you feel so good about yourself after that introduction. And then you think, man, I didn't even catch that person's name because I was rehearsing my own intro. Filtering. Filtering is an example of hearing only the things you want to hear, right? How often does that happen to us in a day? Judging, okay, right? Sometimes, I want to make a little aside here. When we talk about these blocks, they're not bad. Like these are sometimes these can be like tools to engage in listening. So like back to judging, we're always kind of judging. Should I trust this speaker right now? Is what they're saying factual, right? Is it good? Is it bad? And that can be useful. It's just, if you're just judging so hard in your own inner monologue that you're not actually openly listening to the communicator, then it becomes a block and you're not getting all the information. Daydreaming. Well, hopefully you haven't been employing this block throughout this seminar, because I know this is a lot of information, but we just can't help it sometimes. Like we start thinking about some, I don't know, fantasy, like no matter how like benign it really is, it's just like our mind goes down this tangent and all of a sudden we didn't hear the last 15 seconds of what the speaker was saying. And sometimes it gets triggered by a word from the speaker that you identify right away, which is the next block. So like you identify this, then you start dreaming about some situation that's happened to you in the past. And even if it's only like 7 seconds, you just missed a very important piece of information. So that brings us to identifying. It's like, yeah, I'm like that. I'm like that. Yeah, me too. Yes, yes. And sometimes you're trying to identify so much that you're not actually getting all of the information that the person is trying to communicate, right? So that's where identifying sometimes can be good, where you're exercising empathy, right? You're trying to put yourself in their shoes, and that can be actively listening. But if it becomes too much, identifying becomes a block. And then there's advising. As coaches, our role is to be advisors. We are trying to make people achieve things they never thought were manageable. So like now we're trying to fix. You should do it this way, squat like this, clean like that, run like such and such. If we're doing this all the time, sometimes we can get more information out of our athletes if we just silence that advising inner monologue that we have and just listen openly. Then there's sparring. Who here has done that, right? Well, this person's going to say this, and then I'm going to respond with that. And then when I respond, I know that they're going to say this comeback, but I have a response to that. I'm going to come back and hit them with this. And then you have this like sparring match going on in your head while the other person's talking, and you didn't hear anything they said. Being right. We talk at length about being right. Okay. Sometimes rather than trying to figure out our argument to prove our point, we should just listen to what the other one's saying, because you never know. They might have some really important piece of information that could change the way we think for our own embetterment. Derailing. That's when you're thinking about only the things that you want to talk about, not listening to the communicator, and then you're trying to derail the whole conversation into the points that you want to talk about. And placating. This can be frustrating, but we've all done it. Sometimes, we'll have athletes come up to us and you're giving instructions, you're communicating, they're hopefully listening, but instead they're just going, yes, coach, yes, coach, yes, coach, yes, coach, And then you stop talking and they're still going, yes, coach, yes, coach. I didn't even say anything. Are you really listening to what I'm talking about right now? Or are you just placating me the entire time, right? So those are examples of several of the listening blocks that can prevent us from really receiving the true essence or feeling the intent of the communicator. So how can we get better at this? Well, we want to actively listen. And sometimes it's like using these blocks, like I said before, but using them as a tool rather than a block to really engage with the communicator. And a couple ways to show that you're actively listening is one, paraphrase. You can say things like, that's a great point. If I heard you correctly, did you mean, and then say what they said in shorter words. And they have an opportunity to then say, yes, that is exactly what I meant. Or they can say no, and now the speaker has an opportunity to clarify, and then you can get the whole message, right? So that's where like clarifying comes in. Am I right that did you just say XYZ? Right? Great tool. Tells the speaker that you're listening and actually providing feedback, like good, deep feedback, picking up on points that are super relevant to the communicator. We can listen empathetically, being careful not to fall into an identifying block, but put ourselves in that person's shoes. Like, how are they feeling? Can we really feel the intent that they're trying to project? And listen with openness and listen with awareness. This is the most difficult, but if we can practice mindfulness, right? Like we were talking about being fit to lead in the 5-point hierarchy of effective coaching, if we can be mindful and listen without inner monologue at all, yet focusing and attuning to body language, eye contact, tonality, all of this stuff, we have a better chance of really feeling the intent that the communicator is trying to project. And fact check. That's a great way. I mean, we live in a world of fact checking right now, but you can ask people in a compassionate way too. You don't have to be condescending. Is that true? I heard something else from this source that might contradict that. But the fact that you're fact checking lets the communicator know that I'm locked in and I'm not zoning out. And then there's the meta message assessment, right? So the meta message just means like, what is the information being conveyed beyond the message that the communicator's talking about? And that goes into like context, right? What is the environment that we're in? What experiences is the communicator just recently, coming from? And at the end of the day, to be great communicators, we have to commit to understand. If you go into every communication with somebody else and in your mind, you say, whatever happens right now, I'm going to try my hardest to understand that person. I'm going to try my hardest to feel that person's intent. We're going to be in a great society if all of us at large could do this all of the time. And for us as coaches, we can have better connection. We can show that we care, right? If we always commit to understanding. So how do we coach listening? Because we have to do this for our players. One way is to ask this simple question on the slideshow. Who does not completely understand? This is a great strategy. I'm sure you've been in a situation before where yourself or another coach has said, does everybody understand? And everyone says, nodding their head, yes. Or you'll say things like, does that make sense? And everyone says, yes, that makes sense. Yes, yes, yes. But that's just like an automatic knee-jerk reaction. Everybody's going to say yes. They're not going to completely understand, right? So then you get out and then you start coaching the lift or they get into the workout and the athlete's doing it all wrong. And they're like, well, I don't understand, coach. And you're thinking to yourself, well, shoot, 10 minutes ago when I was giving the instructions, you were saying, yes, coach, I understand, because it's a knee-jerk reaction. If we say who does not completely understand, that gives people the opportunity to fess up. But we all know no one wants to be the dissenter. No one wants to be the weirdo who goes, yeah, coach, I don't understand. So the next step in this strategy is to say, okay, athlete A, Usually that's the person you're fairly certain doesn't completely understand. Tell me exactly what you're going to be doing in this exercise. And they're going to give it their best shot. And then you can clarify. Praise first. Athlete A, thank you for having the courage to give me the back brief on this instruction. However, that's not exactly what the intent is, and we want to make sure that we're doing X, Y, and Z. Thank you for pointing that out. So now all the other athletes just saw through social learning theory that it is okay to not understand, and then they can raise their hand. So now we say, does anybody else not completely understand? Well, since we've made it safe to respond, you're going to see everyone's hand come up. And that's awesome, because now you can troubleshoot everyone's misunderstanding. And then when we get to the exercise, everyone's doing the right thing. And it allows people to ask questions, which means they can employ active listening techniques like paraphrasing, clarifying, and fact checking. So outputs. Outputs are constructed by the why, who, what, how, when, and where. That's a lot. The why of why we output is to project intent, but to establish credibility. Who is speaking? Who is projecting this intent? Well, that's me and the listener. So we have to have self-awareness. Like, what is my mood? What is their mood? What is the context? The what. What we say matters. Say what you mean. Words are powerful and have a very strong effect. How we say it. I can't hear what you're saying because your actions speak so loud. So our body language and our behaviors set the context of what we're trying to communicate. And when we say things, timing is everything. You know, as coaches, we're advisors. It's probably not the best idea to try to fix every correction all at once. Sometimes when the message is conveyed gives it more impact. And then where we say it, be aware of the appropriate environment. Are we in public? Are we in private? Is this an academic setting? Is this a field setting? Understand where we are and select the appropriate environment to communicate your message. So we'll go into each one of those questions, and we're going to start with the why. So what we put out, we own. And the reason we're communicating is ultimately to create credibility. We want to establish credibility because every listener is always asking themselves, why should I listen to this person? You're doing it right now. You've been doing it this entire seminar. Even from the very first day, you were at least a little skeptical of why should I listen to Harrison and Johanna? And when we start communicating, we're communicating our thoughts, our observations, our feelings, and our needs. Okay? And if we're trying to be credible, if we're expressing thoughts, we have to clearly articulate inferences. What are we inferring? What is a judgment? Like, these are just thoughts I'm talking about. It's not fact. What are the assumptions that I'm making? Is this a theory? Is this a belief? And it's okay to discuss this, but explain your rationale as clearly as possible. We're also going to express our observations. And when we do this, make sure we're consistent. We have to explain contradictions. Life is full of contradictions. An athlete's going to be like, well, coach, you just said the opposite. And you're like, well, in that context, that was such. In this context, it's very different. But if we can come out in front and explain the contradictions, we'll be more credible. And we'll always be more credible if we can admit when we're wrong or we don't know. The reality is we can't possibly know everything that there is in this universe, really, and definitely not in sports performance. Cite your sources and facts about observations, right? That always lends a lot of credibility. And when we're expressing feelings, we have to make sure that we're eliminating blame and not identifying the person we're talking to with these feelings. right? So you'd say like, I feel, I feel disappointed when you say you're going to do something and you don't do that. That is very important. That's much better than say you are disappointing. Because if I say you are disappointing, that means that person is now identified as a disappointment and can't change their behavior. If I say I feel disappointed, one, that I get to retain all the power over my own feelings, and that gives the other person an opportunity to change their behavior to not make me feel disappointed. Needs, right? Eliminate blame and identification, just like when we were expressing our feelings, right? We want to say, I need, right? Like, these are my needs. I need you to do this. So we never want to demand what we can't enforce, right? If you're late to practice, you sit out the next game. Really? What if it's your star player? And my way or the highway will always leave you alone on the highway. So that's just not a good approach. It used to be super popular back in the day, but good thing we're all evolving as human beings. And now we understand that we can go through life collaboratively. So who is speaking to whom, right? So now we have to have some kind of assessment of me and the other person or people that we're communicating with, right? What is my current mood? What am I thinking? What am I seeing? What am I really trying to communicate? What are my needs? How important is this communication anyway? Do I even need to say it, right? This is all a way to assess my own current state, which is going to project a certain intent. And at the same time, wouldn't we want to have great awareness of the listener? Like, what is their mood? What is their body language telling me? What is the context of this communication? And are there any extenuating circumstances that you know? Like outside of context, like this person is involved in some other group, or they have just completed some degree and they're really focused on a certain train of thought. That would be great to understand as we try to communicate with them. What we say. Folks, words are drugs, and they actually create a physiological change in our bodies when we hear them. Words are drugs. Think about when people yell at you and they cuss at you, how does it change your actual body state? Ever pay attention to that? Maybe you get a little tense. Maybe you get hot, right? That's where the whole phrase hot under the collar came from. The word that someone else spoke is creating a physiological change in your body, just like taking, aspirin for a headache. You have a headache, there's something going on in your brain that's causing pain. You take aspirin, the pain goes away. Pill in, physiological change. Words do the exact same thing. So we should speak clearly with precise words. We should always know the context and avoid distortions. Unfortunately, it seems like in the media and in the political landscape, everyone's distorting the context of what's really happening. And think about what's happening in society right now. Nobody knows the truth. Everything's a conspiracy theory right now. And that is not effective communication because nobody knows the truth. If we want to be great communicators, avoid distortions. Reduce stutterings, and personal filler words. And this is so hard to say what you mean. How many of us have gone through life and at some point have said, that's not what I meant? Well, whose fault is that? The listeners or the speakers? And the reason that's challenging is because the totality of every moment in life is so huge that words are so limited to really convey the entire experience of the moment. So it's difficult. That's why it's hard to say what we mean, but we got to do our best. What is said and what is heard is very different. And if we're giving instructions, always pretend the people we're speaking with have zero knowledge of what you're about to explain. Even if you're among colleagues and peers in your industry, and it's like, okay, everyone has these degrees, we should have this level of education in this subject matter, still speak as if people have zero knowledge. You'd be surprised what folks don't know. And I can tell you, in the Soldiers to Sidelines team, we have a mantra in our culture, and that is, we want to pretend that we are 5-year-olds when we're speaking with each other about how we're going to steward this organization. And we all are under the understanding that none of this is condescending, because we all know about the gray area between what is said and what is heard. So if we speak to each other like we're just infants, super direct, super clear, we can now feel more confident that we are all on the same page moving forward. So you can practice speaking more precisely by simply slowing down and thinking about your words carefully before speaking. What seems like an eternity in your brain is actually a comfortable pause to the listener. Many coaches are poor at this and don't realize the effect they're having on their listeners. Look, I'm from Northern New Jersey, right? New York City. We speak fast. I have to work on this all the time. In fact, even in this little homework assignment, you see moments where I start to race through my words. Something we have to practice always. Just slow down. And how we say it. Our body language is communicating so much information. So I want to tune your attention to the bottom of the slide. It says illustrators and regulators. What those are. Illustrators. If I'm using my hands, right, to show you what's going on, doing all this, boom, 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 I am illustrating what's coming out of my mouth. Regulators are when we're the listener and we're trying to regulate what the speaker's saying to us by our own body language, right? We could be nodding our head, showing that we're in agreement, right? If we were really rude, we could be like this, meaning like speed up, get to the point. Our director of football and I, we have this wonderful phrase called land the plane. So when you get up to speak and describe instructions, we say land the plane. And sometimes I'll be talking and he'll look at me and just go, he's regulating to me to land the plane. So our demeanor is made up of the gestures, the meta messages, which it's the information beyond the message we're delivering, our posture, and our facial expressions. All of these things convey information that comprise our demeanor. So how do we do that? Things that you know, right? Hands on the knees. If we have our hands on the knees, it could express readiness. You know, think of like a ball player getting ready to go. Hands on the lips, right? Thinking. Or it could be impatience. Arms crossed, defensive or closed. I know for me, this is very comfortable for me, so I can sit like this and be relaxed. And players know it. When I'm like this, I'm very approachable. Okay. But for the most part, it can come off to someone who doesn't know me as defensive and closed. Shrugs, unsure, palms up. What's going on? I have no idea. That's a pet peeve of mine. Legs uncrossed, straddling a chair shows openness, right? Relaxed, confidence. Legs crossed and kicking could be bored, anger, frustration, right? We look at the chest and head, right? If we're slumped, unconfident, timid, weak. Tall chest up, confident and commanding. Head tilted, inquisitive. I don't really believe that. I'm doubtful. Head down, guilt, shame. Head up, proud. Breathing. Short, quick breaths, anxious, nervous, excited. Deep sigh. frustrated, or stressed. Slow, relaxed breathing, patient, comfortable. Think about your breath. How often have you manipulated your own breath to convey a message to somebody else? Sure hasn't been very often. Sometimes this whole breathing communication is pretty automatic. So let's talk about facial expressions. This is fascinating. So there's 6 universal emotions: happiness, sadness, disgust, fear, anger, and surprise. The point I want to make here is if there's about 6 universal emotions, we have 10,000 facial expressions. Think about 10,000. So we have 10,000 expressions to really convey 6 emotions. And that just lends us to know that these emotions are complex. There's a lot going into that. There's combinations of like happiness and sadness, or sadness and disgust, or surprise and sadness, surprise and happiness. And context changes everything. And there's this Dr. Paul Ekman created the facial action coding system. And what he did was he measured every combination of muscle twitch in every muscle in the face and attached that to an expression. And he found that there's about 10,000 of these expressions. And it's mind-blowing. This person is so good at intuiting information from other people's facial expressions that he can spot a liar like this within 20 seconds of witnessing a conversation between a couple. He can determine whether or not the marriage will succeed by like 95%. It's just fascinating how good he is at this. So anyway, the point here is, let's get very good at being in control of our facial expressions to convey the information we want to convey. So paralanguage, this is like all the information outside of our language. And really that's pitch, resonance, articulation, tempo, volume, rhythm. If we can manipulate all these things like data on an equalizer of a stereo, we can affect the information that the person we're communicating with is receiving. So like if we have a high pitch, tight vocal cords, that could be joy, fear, or anger that we're expressing. Down pitch, depressed, tired, or calmness. Resonance, do we have a thin voice or a thick voice? How does bass and treble affect the words that are coming out of our mouth? Usually more bass, important, commanding, assertive, it makes us confident. Think of an actor that you know who has great bass in their voice. I like to think of Morgan Freeman. Think about his voice. Thin, more treble, weak, unassertive, insecure. Articulation. Are we being clear and precise? That makes us more formal and professional. Do we want to be that way with our athletes sometimes? Or do we want to have more comfort, be a little bit more unprofessional sometimes? And that would give us reason to incorporate more slang, more accent, tempo. The pace makes a big difference. If we're slow, we can come across as more sincere, thoughtful, interested, but you could also be considered as lazy or indifferent. If we speak fast, excitement, expressive, persuasive, but could also be insecure or nerve-wracking. Volume goes without saying. Loud is enthusiasm, confident, commanding, soft, softness in our voices, trustworthy, caring, understanding. And rhythm. Symbolic emphasis changes meaning. Think about that statement at the bottom. That's not what I said. Well, that implies that it's not what I said, but my body language is telling you otherwise. Or same sentence. That's not what I said. That means it was said, but somebody else said it, right? So the rhythm and the syllabic emphasis is really important in conveying meaning. Where we say it, ever have someone totally invade your intimate space, right? Think about somebody who's all up in your face and trying to speak loudly. So annoying, and coaches sometimes do that. Like, think about what effect that's going to have on a player when you're all up in their face yelling. Know the tone we want to use and the distance from which we are speaking to folks. Understand the difference between a public setting and a private setting. If we're in public, we want to express universal points. We've got to make sure we know our audience. So if we're going to single somebody out, we have to make sure that they can take it in public, even if it's for good reasons. You might be delivering a compliment, but that might embarrass somebody. You got to know the audience. If we're in public, we always want to be constructive, right? If we have to make a negative point in public, try to nominalize and use pronouns to teach the lesson rather than specifics, right? And only convey public information in public. If we have private information, keep it private, right? If we're in private, that's when we want to discuss sensitive information, because it's typically emotionally charged, right? So if we know we're going to have a super emotionally charged conversation, it might be best to do it in private so we don't make a scene and embarrass the other person. Or we can just say, hey, I need you to come into my office or come over here, because now it creates intimacy. And if you're going to speak to the individual, we want to make sure we're doing it in private. Individual points in private settings. So when we speak, if you know your projected persona, you can use the reciprocal tone, posture, eye contact, and or loudness to create impact. Proper timing is imperative. Like, for instance, like, I'm a dominant, like, loud, verbose person. If I just slow down and talk a little quieter, many times that can have a lot more impact. And timing is an art that will improve as you continually observe the interactions and their outcomes. It's back to that awareness of ourself, an awareness of the audience, and understanding the context. Long pauses can increase dramatic effect. If you want to say something that's emotionally charged and you want to deliver it, and then pause. Because silence marinates emotion. Let it stew, let it build. As a coach, you can be in control of all of this. And no man is a prophet in his own home. It does not matter how great of a coach you are and how many degrees you have. If you're coaching your own kids, it's going to probably fall on deaf ears. It's just the way that it is. So sometimes it's great to convey a message with different messengers, so long as the point gets across. And pick the right times to maximize impact. Don't beat a dead horse. Land the plane. Congruence. This is so important. Consistent congruency creates credibility. We have to make sure that we can align the words we say, the tone, the paralanguage, the body language. All of this has to marry up, because if it doesn't, we're going to lose credibility and we're no longer effective. So, giving constructive criticism. We're doing this always as coaches. I'm sure you've heard of the sandwich technique, and this is something you should practice. Now, the sandwich technique got a bad rap when it was first, created, because it was say something positive, then deliver the critique, and then say something positive again. But this turned out to be like condescending or fake, because everybody was like, all right, you're going to tell me what I did wrong, and you're going to say, hey, you're really smart, but you have these 10 errors on the essay, and but you're really good though. It's like, quit patronizing me, man. Like, tell me what I need to hear, and quit being a fraud. That's how the sandwich technique was initially received. However, there's a better way to do it. When we talk about the positive in the sandwich technique, try to find out and accentuate something that the athlete was doing well. Even if it was just intent or effort, it can be like, I see how hard you're working to get this technique. However, if you can just keep your shoulders up, right, and retract your shoulder blades, you're going to have a flatter back. And if you can do that, you're going to be more stable to get your next PR in the back squat. Right? So we finished with the future, what they could possibly achieve. The first positive is intent or effort. Then we deliver what the instruction needs to be. And then we say, if you do that, you could set a personal record, right? So that's a great way to use the sandwich technique. Always tell players they are acting some way and not that they are some way. So you are being lazy, not that you are lazy. They can change the action, they can change the behavior, they cannot change their identity. The Socratic method. Ask questions without being condescending to lead folks to the right answer. You'd be surprised what folks do know. So just like we said in communication, always pretend people have zero knowledge of what you're about to explain. Also know everybody has a wealth of information that sometimes we as coaches just need to bring out of them. And once we've given them instructions, they might not realize what they've actually heard. So if you can ask specific questions to bring them to the point that you want them to have, they can now own it and remember it longer. Always finish with the end in mind and focus on potential. And clearly, this is obvious. Never humiliate. You will lose credibility instantaneously and create a coaching scar if we humiliate, and especially if it's in a joke. And sometimes we think, oh, I'm just being sarcastic. No, sarcasm leaves coaching scars. We can joke around, but it's really important to understand how detrimental that can be if not taken the right way. So folks, thank you for enduring this presentation. And I think you have now gotten a deeper understanding into the power of communication and all the different components that make up effective communication. And for us to be the most effective coaches, we must be effective communicators. See you tomorrow.